In this video, we're going to show you how to install the upper control arm with ball joint on the Jeep Grand Cherokee, located behind the front wheels. Using a 22mm socket, loosen and remove the lug nuts. Once you have the lug nuts removed, grab the wheel, remove it, and set it aside. Using a 21mm socket, loosen and remove the axle nut. And we're going to go ahead and tap our axle here. We want to make sure that it is free floating inside the wheel hub. And ours is moving pretty good. It does have some excessive rust buildup on there. Just going to clean that up a little bit. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and put our jack underneath the ball joint area on the lower control arm, and we're going to compress our suspension. So if your vehicle is on jack stands, what you want to do is focus on raising the vehicle just a bit where it's just about to come off of the jack stands. We don't want to risk any safety issues. Now the reason we're doing this here is that when we go to disconnect the nut on the upper control arm here, the upper arm is kind of preloaded. It's torqued into a position, what we call a compressed ride height. So if you don't compress this up and you remove this here, the knuckle can drop down, swing out and hit you. You want to prevent safety issues here. So just be careful with it. We compress it, remove this, and then we can go ahead and lower the knuckle down with the suspension at our leisure and anchor it properly to be safe with that. Using a 21mm socket, we want to go ahead and loosen and remove this nut. We want to separate the tower end from the knuckle itself, so we're going to use a hammer and strike this here. You want to make sure that you're wearing safety glasses when doing something like this. Now we want to focus on our ABS speed sensor wire here. On ours, there's a plastic retainer holding this here. So we're going to use our trim tool. We want to go behind here and pop this out of the knuckle. Be careful with the sensor itself. Now if you follow this around the backside and unclip it from the retainers here, you want to make sure that you're handling just the rubber itself. Don't pull on the wire. When you come to this one here, sometimes you can grab the bottom and the upper and just kind of twist it and work it out. Ours is kind of stuck in there. So we're just going to use our tool here to assist us and kind of prying that out. And that gives a lot more flexibility. We're going to use a 21mm swivel socket to go ahead and loosen this nut. We're not going to remove it. We just want to bring it down a little bit. Now we're leaving the nut on here. We brought it down just to the point where the ball joint stud is right at the top of the nut here. And the reason why we're doing this here, we're going to strike the knuckle here with a hammer. When the ball joint separates, if this does have some more preload on it, it's going to release and the nut will capture this so the knuckle won't pop out and swing towards you. Let's go ahead and work on that now. Just use a hammer and strike right here. You can see that the control arm has popped up a little bit. And we can push that down. Now before we remove anything here, I'm going to go ahead and anchor the knuckle here using a securing strap. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something that's going to hold some pressure here. Doesn't have to be super tight. You're just going to keep this from coming out at you. Now I'm going to continue to remove that nut. Now at this point, I'm slowly going to lower the jack so we can go ahead and separate these safely. You can see our strap is holding this. And we're going to work our CV axle out. I'm going to use a small pry bar. And just kind of get in here and work this So at this point, we're going to release our securing strap. We need to allow this to drop down a bit more, give us a little bit more play pulling that axle out. Now I want to go ahead and pop the CV axle out of our transmission. In order to do that, we're going to use a pry bar, and we're going to put this up between the transmission or the differential area here and the axle and just gently pry out. Now I'm going to go ahead and tap this in gently. And then give it like a little snapping motion out, and there we go. Now sometimes you might get a little bit of differential fluid leaking out of here. You can put a catch can, a bucket, maybe some towels or something like that. I'll just grab this, slide this out a little bit. Now we can't technically remove this yet, but we're gonna set this down like so. Now with that axle drop down a bit lower here, when we go ahead and loosen and remove our lower strut bolt, it's now gonna give us clearance to go ahead and pull us up and over. Now we're gonna use a 23mm socket on the nut side here and a 21mm socket on the other side, on the bolt side. And let's go ahead and loosen and remove the nut, but leave the bolt in place. So in our particular case here, our impact gun is not loosening this here. We're gonna have to use our breaker bar to go ahead and assist us in taking this off. On the lower bolt here, we had already removed the nut. We're gonna go ahead and tap this through. Now at this point here, our control arm is at a neutral ride height. It's kind of, when it's tightened down, it compresses the bushings and everything, so it's kind of locked in right here, but allows it to twist on the bushing itself. When we go to install the new one, I wanna have the general ride height the same. I'm gonna use a crayon, and I'm going to trace this. Now it's not perfect, but what I'm doing is when I go to line up the other one and tighten down the hardware, I want this almost at the same ride height. I don't want the arm 2 inches down facing down. I want to pretty much torque it in this position here. Now here we are underneath the hood. In order to remove the bolt for our upper control arms, there are 2 nuts available that we need to remove. There's one on the front side of the strut tower here, down inside here, which is a little tough to get to. There's also one on the back side of the strut tower, or on the back side we need to gain access to. In order to gain access to the front one, we're gonna make it nice and easy. Remove the air box. Let's go ahead and do that. On the side of the air box, we have a clamp. Use your flathead screwdriver. We're gonna loosen this here. Right beside it is a vacuum hose. Pop that off. Here's your front differential vent line. And we'll just pop this off here like so, just loosen it. On the other side of it, there are 2 retaining clips. Put your finger on it and just pop them away. Lift this up and remove it. Grab that air filter, pop it out, remove it. Along the top of our air intake here, we just have the hood seal. Those little plastic trim buttons securing the hood seal there. So use your trim tool, gently pop these off. Now if they do pop out of the gasket, it is not the end of the world. You can simply reinsert them, but you want to pull that off and go ahead and lift this up and out. Now that we have the airbox out, you can see that we have clear access to the front side nut here. Now to get the back one out, you're gonna basically locate this on the other side. So you're just basically gonna reach on the back side of the strut tower to go ahead and gain access to that one. To help us gain access to that back nut, we're just gonna grab our upper engine cover here, pop that up and lift that off and set it aside. We're gonna use an 18mm socket here. Now the bolt itself has a locking retaining tab on it itself, so it should keep that bolt from spinning in the wheel well area. There we go, we have that nut off. Now that we have the nut off the front side, we want to go ahead and we're going to go to the back. Now the nut we need to get to is the one down there. In order to properly gain access to it to loosen it, the steering shaft here has a Torx bit bolt on it, just before it goes through the firewall. We want to go ahead, loosen and remove that and disconnect the shaft. But before we do that, we need to secure the steering wheel on the inside of the vehicle so that that does not spin freely when we separate this shaft. Now on the inside of the vehicle, we used a rubber securing strap to lock onto our steering wheel, brought it down and anchored it onto the brake pedal arm down below. When we disconnect the steering shaft from underneath the hood, that's going to prevent our steering wheel from spinning freely. You don't want that to happen because it can mess up the internal components on the inside of that steering wheel. Let's go ahead to the outside again. And right here we have our T50 Torx bit with our extension. We want to go ahead and loosen this and remove it. And I'm just going to reach down there and remove that. Now on the inside of the vehicle, we already secured the steering wheel in place, and we came out here and we removed our Torx bit bolt here. Now on the left-hand side, there is a split on this unit here. And what we normally do is we can use a flathead screwdriver or a pry tool to go ahead and tap into that split to open this up and slide it off of the shaft right here. Now, because it is on the far left side, I can't get a tool in there. So what you're going to want to do is you want to gain access to that. If you have to, go back into the vehicle, release the steering wheel locking mechanism. We're going to go ahead and rotate this so that the slit is facing upwards so we can get access right in the top center right here. And secure the steering wheel again. Do not forget to secure the steering wheel. Then we're going to go ahead and open this up and slide this off of this shaft right here. Now we have a pry bar in here right in that slit, and we're going to go ahead and tap this. We're trying to open this up a little bit so we can slide this off. And we're trying to pull this coupler or this steering U-joint off of the shaft right here. Now it's hard to try and slide this off. So what I'm doing is I'm using this pry bar and I'm going down. The steering shaft itself has a little collar on it right down here. And I'm tapping on the pry bar to go ahead and push that down because this steering shaft is collapsible. So I'm gently tapping on this, working it down the shaft. And that in turn is working this off of the shaft up here. So you can try and open that up a little bit, but I'm assisting it by working on that shaft. I'm going to continue to do that until the shaft separates. All right, we can see that's coming off there. And by doing this, we should have better access to that nut on the back side of the strut tower and to get our tools on there. Now with that steering shaft out of the way, we're able to get our gear wrench in there and get a little bit more room in here. We're able to break that free and start to work this nut. Now what I'm experiencing right now is the bolt itself has a tab on it that locks the bolt in place. However, that tab can move about a ½ inch to the left or to the right about a ½ inch the other way. As I'm loosening this nut, that bolt is spinning with that tab and it's not hitting anything in particular, it's floating. So what I'm doing is with my hand on the gear wrench, I have my index finger on the bolt. I'm going to loosen this and then put my index finger on the bolt to keep it from spinning, to relax into its neutral position. And then loosen that nut some more and do the same thing. Loosen that nut a little bit, finger on the stud, and let that gear wrench drop. Now, if you have assistance, you can have someone go down into the wheel well area and hold that bolt while you do this. But if you're doing it by yourself, well, you gotta do it just like that. You can maybe put a set of vice grips or something, locking pliers down on that bolt to lock it into place.
I suppose that's an option as well. And of course, we're just going to continue to do this until that nut is loose enough where we can spin it off by hand. Now, if you don't have a gear wrench, you can just put a wrench on there and put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. Just work it as necessary. Now that nut feels like it's pretty loose. I'm hoping I can reach down there. There it is. Spin that nut. And there it is. Now the back bolt we can wiggle out. Like that one right here. Here's that tab. So when we were spinning that nut on the back, this was spinning like this, back and forth, and this tab was hitting the body right there. So by me putting my index finger on the end, when this spun up, I could put my finger on it and then loosen that nut. Now let's go ahead and try and remove that forward bolt. We might have to finagle this control arm a little bit to get this out. Now our forward bolt here, when you pull it out, it hits the spring itself. Now the little tab on here, I want you to face it towards the back. I'm going to pull this back. Pull it towards the spring. Now I'm going to use a large pry bar. I'm going to put it between the springs here, between the coils, and gently pry this away. And what we're doing is we're opening up the coils a little bit. Here we go. And we're able to get that bolt out. At this point here, grab the control arm, wiggle that out. Now on our replacement control arm, this will work for the standard suspension or the electronic suspension. This has the ball stud for the level sensor on it. So you want to go ahead and remove this if you do not have the electronic suspension. Good, feed our control arm up into place. Get that started in the back. And then we'll use our pry bar. Go ahead and pull that out. There we go. Let's go ahead and install the back bolt. We have our bolts in. Let's go ahead and go to the top side and get the nut started. And the other thing we can do if you want is go ahead and line this up to our general position that we had marked the old control arm at, and we can put a pair of locking pliers here to hold this up into place. Now when we feed the stud through, we can go ahead and twist it, and you can feel it hit the lock, the little lock tab. So we want to go ahead and we're going to start this. Sometimes this is beneficial to have an extra set of hands down underneath the vehicle to hold that bolt into position so it doesn't push back in. We're just going to go ahead and snug this down. Now we're going to go ahead and install the nut on the back side, and we'll get that started now. All right, so at this point here, I have that nut spun down as far as I can go. Get that gear wrench in there. We'll go ahead and snug that down. Once again, if you have an extra set of hands, someone can hold that bolt. Otherwise, use your index finger to hold the center of the bolt. Go ahead and tighten that down. Go ahead and torque down the upper control arm nuts to 44 foot-pounds. Repeat for the back. Okay. I'm going to start by putting a thin coat of grease on the shaft here. It's going to help us get the clamping part on a little bit easier.
And wipe off your hand there so it doesn't get all over the collapsible shaft. At this point here, we have it lined up. I'm going to go ahead and reach down there and wiggle that all the way up. Now there's a notch right here, a groove, that is going to line up with the bolt when we put it through. So if you put the bolt in and it doesn't go in, it's because the clamping component here isn't lined up with this. The bolt actually has to slide right through it, so it works as a lock as well. Now we got the component up on the shaft there. We're going to go ahead and install the Torx bit bolt, and then we'll snug that down. Now with that bolt started, I can go ahead and release the securing strap on the steering wheel, and we can go ahead and manipulate this here so we can get the bolt worked in a little bit further and tighten that down. I'm going to remove my securing strap from inside the vehicle. Now we can go ahead and turn this. At this point here, we should be able to go ahead and thread that in and tighten it down. Now let's go ahead and torque this down. I'm going to torque this pinch bolt down to 33 foot-pounds. Now our base is a two-piece part. We have to install, drop down our front portion first. And line that up. Install our lower portion. You want to join these two together down below. Once you get the intake tube into the airbox base, get to line up the rubber grommets with the post. All right, push that down so that the studs come through the rubber grommets here. Okay, drop your air filter down and into position. Make sure that's seated all the way down and around. And we install our cover. The back two tabs need to go in to the back here. So work that intake tube on while we line up that back portion of the cover. Once those two back tabs are locked in, the lid will pop right down. You can snap the snap clips on the front side. There's two of those. We can tighten down the clamp on the back side. Make sure the tab is lined up in the notch with the lid. Tighten down the hose clamp. Right beside that intake tube, we have that vacuum. So we have our front differential vent here. Hook up that vacuum tube, and then don't forget to clip the differential vent tube into place there. Install the weather strip seal, pushing the little grommets into place. Go ahead and take that cover, push that back. You can line up your oil fill cap with the hole on the side. Feed that back, and once that pretty much lines up, push down, and you can feel the cover snap onto the plastic studs underneath. At this point here, we can go ahead and remove your locking pliers if that's what you chose to do. Now there is a second way you can set this up here. This is what we would call a neutral ride height. So when the vehicle is fully loaded with the wheel and on and the suspension is compressed, this is about the average height where the control arm would be. That's why we marked it over here on the side. That'll put us in the general area for the vehicle ride height and why we torqued it where we did. You can assemble all of this here and then go back up top and torque it with the vehicle's weight on it, or you can do it the way we did here. We're gonna try and bring this up.
And I can try and push this up into the differential a little bit. And my goal right now is just to kind of get that set in. It's not fully seated. Remove our strut bolt again. While we're here in this position, we're going to release our securing strap. We want to go ahead and get the inner portion of our CV axle installed here. We're using our pry bar on the inboard portion of our CV axle. We'll go ahead and tap this in. Tap it in until the CV axle is fully seated inside the differential. Go ahead and flex that knuckle, work that CV axle over and into the wheel hub. Install your securing strap once again. At this point here, we can go ahead and reinstall our lower bolt. Once that bolt comes through, go ahead and install the nut. And we have our jack underneath. I want to go ahead and raise up our suspension here. I'm going to lift up our knuckle here until it lines up. Let's go ahead and snug down our upper control arm nut here. At this point here, we can remove our securing strap. Then we can slowly lower our jack. Go ahead and install your tie rod end. Snug down the tie rod end nut. Tighten down the sway bar end link nut. Install your ABS wire in the original location. And then install the ABS wire to the back side of the knuckle. Install the axle nut. I'm going to go ahead and snug down our axle nut. Put your jack under the control arm. We're going to raise the suspension until the suspension is at its neutral ride height, meaning you want the suspension to be fully compressed as if it was on the ground with the wheels on. You'll know this here when the vehicle just starts to come off of your jack stands. We're going to tighten down our lower bolt here on the lower strut, also known as the clevis fork. And torque this down to 173 foot-pounds. And if that bolt is spinning, go ahead and put a wrench on the other side. That is a 21 millimeter. Lower your jack. And once that is off the control arm, go ahead and roll that out. Torque down your lower sway bar end link to 90 foot-pounds. Torque the upper control and ball joint to 70 foot-pounds.
torque down the outer tie rod to 70 foot-pounds. Install 2 lug nuts. Thread those down as far as you can. And we're going to use our pry bar here to set here. And the pry bar is going to go ahead and lock that wheel and keep it from rotating. Now I want to torque down our axle nut to 229 foot-pounds. Now for video purposes, we reuse the axle nut. If you're doing this job, it is required to replace this axle nut. Very, very important. Go ahead and torque it down to 229 foot-pounds. Remove the pry bar and your lug nuts. After you install these components, install your wheel, bring it down to get an alignment professionally performed on this here. That is going to prevent premature tire wear as well as wear of other components. Go ahead and install your wheel. Get our lug nuts all started by hand first. Once we have all these on, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Now we want to go ahead and torque down our lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. And at that point there, you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.